Hello, dear children. Welcome to the second part of the Unit 2, Section C, Tippitty the Flying Squirrel. So, now let's understand quickly what we learned in Part 1. We studied that Tippitty belonged to the rodent family and she was nocturnal. She lived in a little box. Then we read about her daily toilet routine. Her two best friends were Dawn and Brock, and during meals she was tied to one end of the table so as to avoid her tail to get into the author's soup. She even helped the Himalayan nutcrackers, those are the birds, by making holes in the walnuts for them to peck at. Now let's continue with the second part. Flying squirrels are said to lap the drink, but Tippity was much too ladylike to make any such fuss over her milk. Here the author wants to tell us that she behaved like a lady and she made fuss over her milk. She usually was in rather a hurry for it, and consequently more of her face went into the saucer than was intended by nature, with the result that a certain amount of liquid went up her nose and made Tippity sneeze and splutter. Here now the author tells us that she was generally in a hurry in having milk, so because of that most of the liquid used to enter her nose and that made Tippity sneeze and splutter. She used to sneeze because of that, and splutter means when something gets stuck in your throat, so the sound that comes. Okay? Sometimes several attempts were made before she really settled down to have a good drink, but when she did, she got her lips well into the milk and no attempts were made to lap. These lines explains us that Tippity tried a lot not to have milk, but finally when she settled to have milk, she simply dipped her lips into the milk, but she didn't make any attempt to lap that milk. Moving now to the next paragraph, she frequently accompanied me and the dogs on an afternoon stroll after being ruthlessly pulled out of her box. Now here, Tippity more oftenly she accompanied, that means went along with the author and the dogs on an afternoon stroll. Stroll is here walk. After being ruthlessly pulled out of her box, ruthlessly means forcefully they had to take her out from her box to go for walks. For the first 100 yards or so, she was perfectly happy jumping along behind. A flying squirrel's natural mode of progression when on the ground is a succession of jumps, not the graceful little hop of the striped squirrel, but rather a lumbering gallop with all 4 feet in the air at the same time and the tail held straight up in the air, the last 4 inches or so curling over. Here the author tells us that at the beginning, that is the first 100 yards, she was perfectly happy and jumping along behind. And here we can certainly understand that her mode of progression, how is she going to move there? She's not going to walk. Obviously, she's going to jump. And those graceful little hops made by the striped squirrel, but rather it was what? Lumbering. Lumbering means moving slowly or clumsily. Okay, and with that she used to gallop with all 4 feet in the air at the same time, and that at that time her tail used to be held straight up in the air, and with her tail's last 4 inches or so curling over around her. This not being adapted for long distances, Tippity would soon overshoot her endurance and come to a halt. This means it was not possible to go with her for long distances, and Tippity she would soon overshoot. Overshoot means to go beyond her endurance. Endurance means it was difficult for her, and without complaining she used to come to a halt. Halt means she used to stop over there. If I were near, she would make for my leg and be upon my shoulder in the twinkling of an eye, or if Brock or Dawn happened to be at hand, she should spring on to one of the backs and get a free ride. Here the author explains us that when Tippity gets tired, she would hop onto the narrator's shoulder or she would hop on the backs of Brock or Dawn's. An oak or a deodar tree invariably attracted her attention, and she would make her way to the extreme end of a branch and nibble off the young leaves. So she was totally attracted towards the two trees, that is oak and a deodar tree, and without any fail she used to simply get on its branches and nibble off the young leaves, as you can see in the picture. The point of the stem which grew out of the branch appealed to her most, and she would pick off leaf after leaf, just nibbling the juicy end of it and throw the rest away. However, she was quite happy on any tree or shrub and found something to eat on all. Here the author tells us that Tippitty was very happy nibbling the juice from those leaves. As I have already said, Tippity was nocturnal and woke up a little after sunset if left to herself. Provided she did not get a good dinner, she would be prepared to play and look about for odds and ends to nibble on all night through. These sentences means that Tippity after that afternoon stroll she would go to sleep and wake up only after sunset. And if she didn't get a very good dinner after she getting up, what she would do, she would be prepared to play and look about for whatever she could get to nibble on all through the night. I very soon discovered that a good feed just before I went to bed had the effect of making her sleepy too. These lines explains us that the poet very soon understood that before he going to bed he should give her nice good food to eat that will make her sleep all through the night. On custard nights, Tippity would invariably overeat, and that meant sleeping solidly till the early hours of the morning. Now here the nights when she had custard, that means the custard nights, Tippity would invariably means without any fail, she would overeat. Overeat means eating a lot, that is too much. And that meant that she slept solidly, that means very good sleep she used to get till the early hours of the morning. She very seldom woke up during the night. As a rule, I would wake up to find a warm, soft, furry ball curled up against my neck. But occasionally, the awakening would be much ruder, and I would find Tippity having a lovely game with my toes, my ears, or my hair. Now, here during the night, the narrator would wake up and find a curled ball against his neck, and occasionally that means sometimes he would get up and see that Tippity was having a nice game with his toes, ears, and hair. There was something extraordinarily fascinating about her every movement, and her little chirrups of pleasure was very sweet to hear. Chirrups are the soft sound that she made. Tippity had an assortment of calls. Her growl was most alarming and would have done credit to an animal 10 times her size. This means that looking at Tippity's size, nobody could believe that she could take out those heavy sounds of calls like growl or chirrup. Had a temper of her own, I am sorry to say, which every member of the household, master and dogs included, had occasion to remember. Here the author tells us that every member of the house, whether it be the servants, he himself, or the dogs, they all knew about her temper, that is a state when she gets angry. It showed for a second and was gone again as suddenly as it had been roused. But in that instant her sharp claws had torn some offending hand, or her terrible teeth had sent a dog howling out of the room. These lines tells us that Tippity was very short-tempered, but in that instant her sharp claws could tear any hand that offended her. Offended means troubled her. And secondly, her terrible teeth could bite even the dogs and send them out howling from the room. So these instances tells us about Tippity's state of temper. Moving now to the last paragraph. Poor Tippity! Her end was tragic in the extreme. We hope it was also painless. She had been tied up just before dinner, but somehow the end of the chain had got unfastened from the leg of the chair. I heard her hopping about on the boards of the veranda and dragging her chain behind her. I went out to bring her back, but in that instant something flashed past me. There was a tiny squeal, and a fox had poor Tippitty in its relentless jaws. Her death was avenged, but that is another story. In this paragraph, the author wants to tell us that Tippity was tied up as usual just before dinner to one leg of the table, but somehow the chain it got loose, after which the author he could hear the hopping on the board of the veranda, and Tippity moved out dragging her chain behind her. And when the author went out to bring her back, at that time only something flashed past him. Then he heard a tiny squeal, that is, a soft sound, and a fox had poor Tippity in its relentless jaws. Relentless is not showing any pity, not showing any mercy. Her death was avenged, but that is another story. This means that the revenge was later taken, but that the author has not mentioned it over here. With this, children, we have completed this lesson. Thank you for being with me.